so daggone important. So I want to jump into this idea of, and I'm going to throw this buzzword out here, and I say buzzword because it tends to be one.
Sure.
This buzzword called tokenism. When you're hiring somebody, specifically if it's like an all black or all white, church staff, and you bring on a black guy, my scenario in a lot of ways, right? You bring on a black guy. Some people's response to that is like, oh, he's just a token black guy. Mm. But if you don't understand the reason why we're looking for a certain person to be able to represent and have representation for people in our context, so that way, we can minister as a team effectively to our culture of our block or our city or whatever have you, that demographic that God has called us to, then it could be misrepresented if you don't understand what needs to happen, right? And so I have understood tokenism to be something to where you bring somebody in of a different race and you just have them up there as a face of the ministry, but their presence doesn't shift your culture at all.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Multiethnic Gospel Approach podcast, where we cover all things multi-ethnic.
It's the M-E-G-A-P-O-D-C-A-S-T, the Mega Podcast. It's the M-E-G-A-P-O-D-C-A-S-T, Mega Podcast.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? I want to welcome you back to season 3 of the Mega Podcast, where we cover all things mega and we focus on gospel-centered diversity in church culture. I'm here with my dude Micah Gasson, our campus pastor here at 3 Circle Church Midtown. And by the way, if you don't know who I am, my name is Marcel. I'm the worship pastor, student pastor here at our Midtown campus for 3 Circle Church. And man, I am excited to be here once again for season number 3. Is that right? I got it
Trace?
Right. Tres?
Yeah.
God dog it, I would try.
I think 3 sounds better, though. I kind of like the way 3 sounds.
Tres.
Kind of like a combination of Spanish and like thrice, like the old.
Yes. It's like, it's multicultured 3. It's a multicultured 3. See how that just happened? Bang. Listen, no, seriously, we are so excited to be back with you this season. And before we move forward anymore, if you have not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, go ahead and search Mega Podcast on YouTube, subscribe, hit that notification bell to make sure that you stay up to date with all the content that we are releasing. You can catch us here every Monday on the Mega Podcast. Cool, man. Well, hey, I'm ready to jump into some really cool stuff. We've had a chance to have some really cool discussions since our last season. Yeah. We had an incredible time with some of our guests. We had Pastor Leonce, Pastor Chris. We had Pastor KJ. We had Pastor Mark DeMaz. Who else am I missing? We had I think it was just you and I, right?
Yeah.
I think
it's everybody. Yeah.
So we had a pretty dope list of people, man.
For sure.
On last season. So
yeah.
I just want to take a moment, give God praise for season 2. You know what I'm saying? But I'm so thankful we here in season 3.
That's right.
Cool. Well, hey, let's move forward. So as you know, we're dealing with the multi-ethnic gospel approach, just thinking about, man, gospel-centered diversity. What is God saying about diversity? How do we, if you're trying to build a multi-ethnic church, man, what are the steps you take? What are the things you need to be mindful of? Or if you are part of a multi-ethnic church and or a multi-ethnic community and you're trying to figure out how to do life because this is new to you, well, this is the place where you want to be, because we talk about all those challenges, all the and different ways to overcome those different obstacles that living a multi-ethnic lifestyle and being in a multi-ethnic community that they present, just because we have cultural barriers that we have to oftentimes overcome in order to be able to love people well and to be able to do life with them effectively. So this is the spot for that. So again, subscribe to the YouTube channel and let's jump into this conversation. You ready, Micah?
I'm ready. All
right, so I'm just going to lie about a word.
Okay.
And we just going to start.
All right.
Hiring. I guess I'm going to lie about more than one word, huh?
Hiring. About a phrase.
Right. I'm going to lie about a phrase.
All right.
Hiring for in a multi-ethnic context. What you got?
Yeah, so I think that often in churches we can kind of focus on one thing without having like a holistic approach. So some churches, for them, the candidate simply needs to have, like a theological acumen. he or she needs to be able to have a seminary degree or equivalent.
In case you don't know, I'm sorry, I got to pause. In case you don't know, we have vocabulary. We have vocabulary here at Mega Podcast. And so my brother Micah just said acumen. You got that? Acumen. I can't spell it. He gonna break it down for you.
Okay, that's right. I'm gonna break it down. I'm not gonna say it 3 times, but I'm gonna break it down.
Acumen.
So I think our qualifications simply are theological. In other words, right? That theological acumen, right? Hey. So just this, and obviously, that's important. The Bible has some very clear marking points to that, right? Like if you're going to be a teacher of God's word, you need to rightly divide the word of truth. The Bible even says you're going to be held accountable one day. Jesus is going to ask you, did you steward his word well? Yeah, so obviously it's not that is not a very important criteria. It's just not the only criteria. Mm-hmm. And so I think churches also need to be asking, not only do I have a good theologian, but do I have a good missionary? Yeah. Like, do I have somebody that's going to come in, if they don't know the context where our church is, to get to know the block, to get to know the different people groups in our block, different classes in our block, the different challenges of our block. Yeah. And so somebody can understand the Bible and not understand the context, and they're not be able to take the timeless message of the gospel and apply it where it takes root on your block, where it's effective on your block. And so I think sometimes people can just make a hire based upon one side, or there's the other side of that. Some churches want to focus so much on the pragmatic side, like, can this youth pastor draw a crowd? Yeah. Can they get a bunch of kids to this event? Mm-hmm. Where if that person doesn't have enough ability to preach the gospel, you can just have a Christian social club that's gospelist, like it doesn't have a message of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus at the focal point of the ministry. Right. And so I think what we need to do is we need to be in the middle to say, how can I hire a missionary theologian?
Come on, break that down for us, man.
So in other words, not only somebody that can articulate the timeless message of the gospel, but they're able to contextualize it in the way they serve, how they do ministry, the what of it, but also the how they do ministry. Like how we do ministry on this block in the most diverse 3 square miles in the state is going to look very different than suburban, monoethnic church, right? And so that's saying, how do I do this on purpose? Yeah. And I think that sometimes we overlook that every writer in the New Testament was a missionary theologian. Yeah. Paul wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. He's often writing it on the mission field, right? Or incarcerated for preaching the gospel in a different place. Yeah. And so he's always asking, how can you, whether you're a pastor or in your city, how does that look like as you apply that in your city, in your context, as a leader where you live? Like the letter he wrote to Galatia, it may have some similarities in what he wrote to Ephesians, but they're 2 different books on purpose, right? Different challenges in the community, different theological issues, different things happening in that community that he didn't just like copy and paste letters. Yeah. So I think sometimes we overlook that the reason those are different is different mission fields, different leadership in those churches. Yeah. And so I think that's a nuance that sometimes as churches we're not always tracking with that, thinking through how do we hire, on purpose somebody that can reach our community.
For sure. And I think too, like with any missionary that is worth their weight and who is going to try to do this well and do it right, they're going to do the proper research for the community that they're going to, for the environment that they're going in. And we've covered this before, specifically in season 2. We talked about this a little bit. But with any missionary, your job is to canvass the area, to find out the demographics, to find out the needs, to find out the language, to find out the culture, so that way that you can work efficiently, not to offend or not to be offended, just understanding those culture norms, which is something that you and I have talked about at length, about just understanding that, man, like there are some barriers that we have as just, you being white, me being black, to where it's just a culture difference. Sure. It's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just a culture difference. Like there's some things that are, celebrated and some things that are just straight up condemned, depending on the culture that you're coming from. And so understanding what those cultural barriers may be, or what those cultural norms may be or not be, is very important, because when you're going into any environment and you're trying to quote unquote minister to them, then if you're offending them before you minister to them, then you won't get to minister to them.
That's
because
right.
you haven't taken the time and the due diligence to understand their culture and the things that they respond to and the things that turn them off.
For sure.
And so I think that the missionary aspect of it, man, we can't take that lightly. That is something that is so vital for what we do as leaders in God's church. In God's church, not our church, but in God's church, as leaders to win his people, to compel his people. It requires some research.
For sure.
You look at Jesus' ministry. He talked to farmers like farmers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
He talked to the lawyers in a very intellectual way to appeal to their intellect.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And so we have to be able to do the same thing if we're entering different types of cultures and context, so that we can become all, so that we can win some.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And so I think that's so daggone important. So I want to jump into this idea of, and I'm going to throw this buzzword out here, and I say buzzword because it tends to be one.
Sure.
This buzzword called tokenism. When you're hiring somebody, specifically if it's like an all black or all white, church staff, and you bring on a black guy, my scenario in a lot of ways, right? You bring on a black guy. Some people's response to that is like, oh, he's just a token black guy. But if you don't understand the reason why we're looking for a certain person to be able to represent and have representation for people in our context, so that way, we can minister as a team effectively to our culture of our block or our city or whatever have you, that demographic that God has called us to, then it could be misrepresented if you don't understand what needs to happen, right? And so I have understood tokenism to be somewhat something to where you bring somebody in of a different race and you just have them up there as a face of the ministry, but their presence doesn't shift your culture at all. That's what tokenism is. That's what I've understood it to be. And so as you're bringing on, people who look differently than you, vote differently than you, value different things than you, how do we make sure that our culture is that we give them space to speak into our culture as a church organization, and how we do overall just do ministry? How do we do that? What are some things that you can think of? Some practical things, even, but just some things to even think through. Like, how do we allow, people who don't look like us, don't think like us, and so forth and so on? How do we allow them to come into our cultures, into our church culture, our organizational culture, and be able to shift that based on where they come from and the insights that they have and experiences that they share? Sure.
Well, I think part of it, not only is there the organizational pieces to that, I think it goes back to the conversation that we just kind of wrapped up. And kind of shifting into this, and that's where Paul says, becoming all things to all people. It requires two things, and you hit on them. It requires self-awareness, and then it requires awareness of the culture you're going into.
That's good.
Like becoming all things to all people means, first of all, I know what my culture is. I'm not blind or oblivious to my own practices and norms, values, all those sort of things, all those things you mentioned, way I vote and all that I understand those things, but also that I know what the other person's preferences are. So I was reading a book recently where this is unpacked, talking about, CQ or cultural awareness, and the author put it this way: like, we need to move beyond the golden rule, treating others how we like to be treated, to the platinum rule, treating others how they want to be treated. So it's the whole idea of, your cultural reality being different than mine. I need to understand that. So that I don't begin to, like you said, build up walls through breaking taboos because I'm unaware. Because I'm unaware of what's culturally normal. And so I think, so let me break that down a little bit. So the first, that self-awareness is personal, but also organizational. So if you are in a majority culture church, whatever the majority is, I think you need to begin to identify, what are your practices, what are your methods, what are the ways you're doing ministry, the ways you're doing worship, how you teach the Bible. Not in the sense of what you're teaching, but how you teach it. And so there are different approaches how churches do that, and you need to identify what is your norm. And then once you've done that, and prepared that groundwork for knowing how you feel about some of those things and how you operate, well, then you have enough awareness as you're seeking to bring on a new staff member to know what those are. So when he or she begins to point out things that are different, you already know what you practice.
Come on.
Because some churches have a good heart to want to become more diverse.
Yeah.
And they recognize it's the next cultural wave, like we talked about in season 1, that by 2030, that's basically 8 years away, right?
So I'm sorry. So I was thinking about something too. Like a lot of people don't understand that black people, like a predominantly black church, we are excited to see a white person walk through our doors. You know why? Because that means that we're reaching other people that don't look like us. We're so excited about that. That is like, man, we got white people, yes! And I'm finding out that it's the same response for a predominantly white church.
Sure.
Like, so there's an intrinsic, like, desire to be able to, minister and serve other people that don't look like you.
Yep.
And I think we just need to, like, find space and find opportunity to fan that flame,
That's right. And so I think that's a great point. So I think for a lot of churches, that is a great godly desire.
Yeah.
But I think what's lacking is the intentionality to get them to stay.
That part. That's good.
And so the conversation has to be for that church that's looking to begin to diversify, that yes, you need to begin to represent the people you want to reach on your staff.
Yeah.
But that means that you seek not to become a multicolored church, that's tokenism, but a multicultural church.
That's good, man.
So you not only invite he or she to the leadership table, but you give he or she the ability to begin to weigh in on how we do church.
Yeah.
So that when that black person comes to visit your predominantly white church, or when that white person comes to visit your predominantly black church, that he or she will sense enough homeness, right? Cultural normalcy of their culture to stay. So that's moving the culture of the organization to match your community.
That's real good.
Who you want to reach. So that's where a lot of churches are just not, because they're saying, well, we've done this event for years and years. Here's how we do church. Here's how we do ministry. Here's how, all those things are built out. And so if you just bring in a person coming from a different culture and you just tell he or she to fit into the existing machine, that's tokenism.
Yeah.
And so one of two things are probably going to happen. He or she is going to leave out of frustration, or worst case scenario, you're going to fire them because you just can't get on the same page.
Man.
And so your heart was in the right place. Intentions were great.
Right.
But that intentionality has to be there to have self-awareness. Why do we do what we do, and how do we do what we do? That's our culture.
Yeah.
And by the way, there's multiple things pouring into that, right? Not only the organizational culture, but white or black culture pouring into that, and norms within those practices, right?
Yeah.
But identifying those layers and saying, hey, here's where we are. Here's where we want to be.
Yeah.
Then you have a roadmap for how to get there.
That's good.
But it starts with self-awareness and then cultural awareness of who we're trying to reach.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you can begin to say, what are the road marks in between here and there?
Right. That's so good. So like if you are, let's say you're not a church leader. Let's say but you're a lay member, and you're coming to church every week and you're serving, you're volunteering, and you're trying to figure out, man, why is our leadership bringing in, this person or these types of people group to lead, and you don't understand, man, what is that about? Maybe it feels like tokenism to you. I would challenge you to go and ask your leadership, how does having them on staff, on the team, how does that tie into the vision for the church and ultimately for you guys' vision for your block? Because I think a lot of times the barriers happen when our lay members don't understand the vision, which is why I think it's so extremely important that we echo the vision. You've said the statement to me a few times, and it's rung in my spirit so loudly. But you said every 6 weeks, vision leaks.
Yep.
And so sometimes we're not, as leaders, we neglect to echo the vision, and in turn, our people begin to lose focus because they don't see what God has shown us for our organization to be. And so I just want to encourage, if you're not in a leading position in your church, but you're volunteering, which you still are leading, or maybe you're just, hey, coming to church on Sundays, that's what God has you right now. That's great. But there may be some things you just don't understand about, man, this multi-ethnic structure of gospel-centered church. You don't understand that. Ask questions. And then also, you're at the right place because we talk about it the whole time.
That's right. Everything
that we post is about this very same topic.
That's right.
As far as engaging in a multi-ethnic multi-ethnic, multicultural community / environment / church, and doing that well and doing it effectively, and understanding, the do's and don'ts, even, and just understanding how do we kind of refine ourselves to live this life that God intended for us to live.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
That's cool.
And I think it's important too to say, when we talk about living a multi-ethnic life, it's not just for church leaders; it's a gospel imperative. You have Paul dealing with Peter about in Galatians chapter 2, where he talks about how Peter, the fact that you used to hang out with the Gentiles and eat pork chops. You know what I mean? And then whenever the Jews came, you stopped hanging out with them, eating pork chops, and started eating like all this kosher food again.
That part.
And he says this is a gospel issue, that you have withdrawn fellowship from a multi-ethnic people group and you become monoethnic again. He says it's a gospel issue. He says you were out of step with the gospel.
Yeah.
And so I think for everybody listening, that our goal of this podcast is not just to equip church planners or just to equip people that are leading in a ministry context, but to say to all of us that living a multi-ethnic life means you embrace the fact that God could have made a uniformity, right? He could have made one race. He could have made, which, I mean, we use multi-ethnic in this. Locally we use race just because that's organically what people use on the street.
Right.
But I mean, when you get to like the image of God in the Bible, that whole word ethnos, right, comes out of the idea of that God has made humanity.
That's good.
Yet humanity has diversity, right?
Yeah.
We have different tones of skin. We have different eye colors. We have all these different things about us as people groups that is God given.
Yeah.
That is sewn into the fabric of how God made humanity.
Yeah.
God could have made singularity and uniformity, but instead He made diversity.
Come on now.
Right? And so heaven's going to be a diverse place. So the church should be a diverse place.
Yeah, man.
Our Christian lives should be a diverse place.
Yeah.
So that means that it's worth it and it matters whether you're a church leader or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
that's good. I think it's too worthy of noting that we all have our preferences. We all have our biases. We all have the things that we, naturally are prone to. I guess what's the word I'm looking for?
Preferences.
Well, as far as to kind of we're lured to, so to say.
Sure.
For lack of better terms, there's another word I just can't think of it for whatever reason. Probably because we're on the Mega Podcast and I just get brain farts every now and again. It is what it is.
There you go. That is what it is.
But no, so we all have these things that we're just kind of prone to, right? Like we just
proclivities.
Navigate. Yes, proclivities. Thank
you.
you.
There you go.
Thank you, Micah.
You're welcome.
Micah, the Revelator.
Every now and again.
Brother.
Every now and again.
Come on, man. But yeah, seriously, we all have those things that's just kind of intrinsic and we like, right? And I think that it's very important that we don't classify those things that are preferences, that are our personal, things that we desire. We don't make that law or make that, this is the only thing that God desires.
For sure.
Because a lot of times we'll make our preferences in what is it, like a law or an ordinance or like the way a thing should be.
That's right.
Because that's why we like it, right?
Yep.
Or because we like it. And that will keep us from enjoying and embracing something else that is out of our norm.
Yep.
And it will cause us to shun something interesting that we tend to do as human beings, just specifically in science. When you don't understand something, you kill it and dissect it. So as people, we tend to do the same thing. And if you're not diligent enough to want to understand, then we'll stop at the killing process and we won't even try to understand it. Versus not getting to the killing point, right?
Yeah.
To where we just don't want to shut it down, but like, man, I want to lean into that and understand and build a relationship with that.
For sure.
Because the absolute true thing, this is something I was thinking about the other day, and I think you'll like this. Newness wears off, but relationship wears on. And so somebody can walk in your life and they're brand new. That's going to wear off after a while. But if you start to build a relationship with them, then that's going to wear on. And you're going to become more entangled with who they are as a person, and likewise for them.
Yeah.
And so that's why we have to do relationship. That's why it's important for us to have community, consistent community, not just occasional community,
That's right.
not just convenient community, but consistent community, because that strengthens us as a people. And I think it shows the world what God intended for us, or how God intended for us to live and to be, specifically with this gospel-centered diversity.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think that the bridge of trust is what is necessary for those stereotypes to get deconstructed, right? And so whenever we're in relationship with people that have a different cultural, like you said, those proclivities, right? Those things that are normative, it's a whole classic, ancient like Greek philosophical explanation of, how the fish in water, the culture's your water, right?
Yeah.
It's your norm. You get out of water, you start flopping around, right? You're uncomfortable.
Right.
And so what we naturally do, if we don't have a missionary approach, is when we encounter that difference, we get out of that water, we want to get back in the water, right? I want to get back where it's comfortable. And so it's not that you can't have those relationships, at all.
Right.
But it is saying there is a more valuable, more meaningful, God-given investment as we lean into that diversity for the sake of understanding. We don't have to align.
Yeah.
Like living a multi-ethnic life doesn't mean that I become and align with Marcel's black culture. Mm-hmm. It just means that I seek understanding and affirmation and celebration, right?
Yeah.
Celebration is different than saying I don't have to assimilate to Marcel's culture to appreciate his culture.
Right.
And to value it.
Right.
Even though it's different than mine.
Yeah.
And I think that is the level of learning those other cultures.
Right.
To where you're not offensive as you seek to reach out to people that are coming from a different background.
For sure.
That allows you to do that and allows you to be able to say, we don't have to be the same.
Yeah.
Like our relationship, our love, what ties together, what wears on, in other words, the glue that holds together is Jesus, the gospel, right?
Come on.
The life, death, and resurrection of a risen Savior who unites us as humanity saved by Jesus.
Yeah.
And so what happens is, I love how you said that we tend to make things like the main thing and make them like law.
Yeah.
Well, that's Pharisaism, right? Mm-hmm. That's Phariseeism, where we take something that's not the gospel, that's not something God given, and we raise it to the standard of what God says.
Come on, man.
We often become cultural Pharisees, because all the things that we like to do that's normal, we raise that to the level of the gospel rather than being gospel-centered in the sense that we say we're united in what Jesus did for us, and we can live with those differences because we're already united.
Yeah.
So we define it the wrong way, right? We make gospel first or gospel second instead of gospel first.
Right.
And there's no basis for unity there.
Yeah.
We have no place to start if it's like, well, you don't listen to the same music I do, or you don't. And there's a lot of things. So let me just give you a couple of points I think is really important.
Come on, talk that talk, Micah.
All
that
right,
was
then.
so random.
It was.
I just wanted to say
I liked it though.
It just felt right.
Talk that talk.
I felt it in my shanana.
We were talking about that the other day. I totally thought Marcel was messing with me. That really is like a thing in black culture, like your right side, right?
Yes, my shanana right here.
Finally, once you asked like somebody else on our team that was also black, that was like a real thing, then I finally believed. It's like, man, you just trying to get me like throw myself out there.
Nope. Trying to diversify you, man. Get your culture.
Hey, it's working.
You know
it's working. So I think you have to be able to personally and organizationally, you have to be able to identify some of those cultural issues that are normal for you. And so you have to ask yourself, do I come from a culture that by and large is more individual focused or group focused?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like white evangelicals, they don't get sometimes what or just white people in general in culture don't understand some of the things that a black cultural person is saying. Because a lot of times we're so individualistic in white Western culture. It's all about me, and it's all focused on my accomplishments, where you come from other cultures that are much more family-centric, and and that identity is different. And so having to be able to identify those things, again, it's not that one is better than the other, they're just different.
Yeah.
And so you need to be able to identify those things and know that's going to look different sometimes, or maybe a shame versus guilt culture. Where if you do live in one of those environments where it is much more group focused and individual focused.
Yeah.
The way that you deal with your identity, things you do, and how that reflects upon your family is different.
Absolutely.
It's very different.
Absolutely.
And so being able to have that awareness of, time versus person.
Yeah.
is a big thing in culture.
Yeah.
You know, where, for instance, like in Latin America, you know, you go to a wedding, like, yeah, it starts at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
You'll be there like 7:45. It's like, when's the wedding going to start? Oh, it started at 6. Everybody just hanging out, chilling, you know, just because it's more focused on the event than it is the time schedule.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so being able to identify those norms.
Yeah, different values.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's not that one is bad and one is good. It's that they're just different.
Yeah.
And so I think what we naturally do, unless we have that missionary mindset to say, let me understand other cultures, is just like, well, I don't like the fact it didn't start on time.
Yeah.
Right? Or I don't like the fact that that this person is more focused on how it's going to influence their family rather than them getting this task done. You know what I mean? And so we have to be able to, and growing a multi-ethnic organization, a multicultural organization, will not happen effectively.
That's good.
Until you're able to do that.
Yeah, that's true.
So I had a meeting with some friends the other day, talking through some church dynamics, and we were talking about this, and it's about cultural intelligence, which people call CQ.
Okay.
So it's the idea within an organization that if you don't remove the ambiguity between cultures, if we say that our different cultures are like ships at sea, if you don't remove the fog, which is a lack of cultural awareness between that, those barges are going to collide. Like, you've got to remove the ambiguity, the lack of intentionality, if those things are going to be able to sail on course and not collide, to have a proper trajectory on where they're heading, right?
Yeah.
Their longitude and latitude, so to speak.
Man.
And so as organizations, if we're going to diversify, we got to have a longitude and latitude point, and understand what are those things that are going to keep us from seeing the collision coming.
For sure.
Right? So if we don't have enough awareness of ourselves, what's our culture, and then also an awareness of another culture, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Those collisions are going to happen.
Yeah.
And so if we're really going to diversify our church, our staff, your life, then it's gonna involve you doing away with the fog through self-awareness and through awareness of the other culture of the person you're reaching out to.
Man. So, if you're just joining this conversation, we've been talking for a minute. Like, we still, first of all, welcome. Again,
yeah, welcome. Come on in.
Come on in the room. Take a seat. Get your popcorn, all that stuff. But listen, we have been talking about hiring for a multi-ethnic church organization, but also just what it means to diversify your staff and your ultimately your congregation. So it's been a great conversation so far. We want you to remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the notification bell, because we want you to stay up to date with all the content that we are putting out. As Mega Podcast, season 3, we on the run, man. You know what I'm saying? So I wanna talk about that fog analogy, like the ships in the night kind of thing. No, I can't do that.
I'm
Too
kidding,
bad. No, I really want to talk about that. Like, what does it mean? How do we demystify diversity?
Demystify, I like that.
Demystify diversity. Because here's the thing, because I think some people are just scared, man. Like, so we want it, but we don't really know how to do it. And so it's like, okay, if we start getting people in here who don't look like us, then that means we have to start being way more intentional. That means we have to start being way more careful about because there's certain things in certain cultures that you can say from the platform that could have an underlining political, view, or underlining racial tone that you can't say once you get other people in the room that don't look like you. Yeah. And so now, like, how do we demystify that whole thing? Like how do we put some handles on it for somebody to say, man, like, I don't know how to not be, just going to use me for an example. I don't know how to not be black. Like, how to not be able to feel for injustices that happens, that's inflicted on my community. But at the same time, how do I still love God's church the way he intended to be able to respond? Because I think that's very difficult in some people's mind. Because when we think about, and I'll just be honest, and this could be for other, cultures as well. When I think about having to be at church with a group of white people, a group of Hispanic people, a group of Asian people, a group of Japanese people, Chinese people, whatever the case may be, right? Like, that to me becomes scarier when we have injustices that are happening in our country, and we don't know how to really speak to it without infringing on somebody else's political view.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, like, that in itself, just the political side, is very like, whoa, like, what do we do in that case? Like, how do y'all handle that? And you and I have talked about that, I think, on season 1. So go back and check season 1. But yes, we talked about that a little bit. But like, man, for the new people that we may have on this particular season, man, like, how do we demystify that?
So I think it's a lot of things.
Yeah.
But I think let me just throw out a handful that have been very significant for us here and continue to be. Because like you said, vision leaks, so that means we got to address it all the time. And just remind people of why we do what we do and how we do what we do and why it's important. But I think for a few people, I think a starting point for someone who really wants to begin to step in this direction is you have to get a friend who you know and whom you love, and you're willing to accept those differences, and who you could ask real questions, knowing that you just want to understand. You're not seeking a debate. You're not seeking to bring them over to your side. You're seeking to say, help me understand. Help me understand. I'll give you one. So, for instance, often for white evangelicals, there is a huge emphasis on the right of the unborn, and as there should be, right? Where some, and so they tend to identify that with a Republican agenda, right? Where there would be other like black evangelicals that may have a different perspective on the quality of life once children are born, right? Like, how do we have social justice initiatives for the single mom who's raising kids in poverty? Like in our 2-mile radius, where we got some households that 19.5 is the annual income. That's poverty. Like, you can't raise multiple kids on 19.5 a year.
Right.
And so where there could just be, well, I don't see how you could be a Democrat. I don't see how you could be a Republican and be Christian. Okay, well, where's that in the Bible, right? And so let's seek understanding.
Yeah.
And so I don't have to come over to your side and say, well, I agree. I'm not going to vote Democrat or vice versa.
Yeah.
Just seek understanding and say, really, it's both and. It's both and.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, we should defend the defenseless, right? That's in the Bible over and over again. Seek justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God, right? That's the guardrails for walking with God in Micah 6:8, right? But then at the same time, we also need to care for the orphans and the widows, right?
Yeah.
That's in there too.
Yeah.
And so I think it's both and. So we sometimes can put things into silos when really both need to be engaged. And so let's seek understanding. And so I think with that in mind, I guess that's the first thing, and that's kind of weaving two things here. The first thing is know somebody different. Yeah. And let me just say to people listening that you really have to be aware that particularly it's very easy for us to have friends that may, so I want to be very careful on how to say this, and Marcel, you can please help me here. Yeah. That you can have a friend that may have a different skin tone, that may have the same culture as you. Right? If they vote the same as you, they listen to the same music as you, they dress the same as you, they live in the same neighborhood as you, like there's so many things that look just like you, then they may be a person that has a different racial identity, but culturally they're very, very similar to you. And of course, keep being friends with them, right? Yeah. But you need to find a friend who you know is going to be very dissimilar to you in a lot of these key things to get to know, love, and serve them and ask them questions, right? Because if they're just like you, just with a different skin tone, you can't really learn from them. Yeah. And so that's what a diverse relationship looks like. So know a person who's different than you. That's step one, because a lot of times we just live in the bubble of people that are just like us because it's that water, right? It's comfortable. Yeah. But I think the second step is, or second thing, is to be able to address political issues and remain tethered together in the gospel.
Come on, man.
So I was having a conversation with Mark DeMaz, a friend. He's been on our podcast last season. And he said, Micah, think about...
That episode was so good.
He's awesome, right? Such a great leader. And of course, has written lots of books and leading a diverse church about what this looks like. He says, Micah, actually, the political environment is more divisive than the racial environment in our country. He says, think about it. Yeah. You have a lot of relationships that often are interracial or interethnic, right? Yeah. But how many relationships did you know that are interpolitical? That's how divisive this issue is. Yeah. And so I think you need to be able to have these conversations while loving one another and recognizing that the gate to heaven is not a ballot box, it's a cross.
Come on, man.
Right? And by the way, Jesus wasn't white or black, he's Jewish, right? So that means he looked probably more Middle Eastern than any of us. Yeah. So what I'm just saying is there's a lot of people groups out there, and God loves them all.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of political ideologies out there, and none of them are King Jesus ideology.
Come on, man.
So I think we just need to be able to sit around the table and love one another and just seek to understand.
Yeah.
So I think know somebody that's different, build relational trust with them and seek understanding.
Yeah.
Be able to address political issues without expecting to be the same.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that's been really key for us here as a church and will continue to be as we continue to dig into all we feel like God's called us to be and being multi-class, multi-generational, multi-ethnic, is that you just have to expand who you're allowing to shape your ideas.
Absolutely.
And so I know like one book that really opened my eyes to this was Eric Mason, his book Woke Church. He talks about historically even like the accessibility of black authors to publishing. Mm-hmm. And the amount of of white producers that are producing movies. In other words, all of the media we're taking in, whether written or video or music, could be within certain streams in which there's no diversity to it.
Yeah.
Whether class or color or culture.
Yeah.
It's coming down one straight pipeline from one people group. And so I think being able to diversify that and ask, who am I reading? Who am I listening to?
Yeah.
And so I think being able to begin to diversify that to say, the perspective I have has been shaped by what I'm taking in, right? And so beginning to diversify that, and I'm not saying you step outside of a gospel centricity of being a Christian at all. I am just saying, like, for me, it's been an intentional pathway of I begin to intentionally read some different black theologians and histories expressing some of the black experience in the U.S. and historically on purpose, not to put me on a pedestal, but to say I simply want to understand.
Yeah.
I simply don't want to have this tunnel vision of this experience where I'm only taking in from a certain people group.
Yeah.
And I'm not hearing from Asian voices and Latino voices and black voices about these issues and about as they read the Bible theologically, what are these things they're seeing? You know?
Yeah.
And it's made my understanding richer and better of how do I pastor a diversity of people that send my teaching on Sunday morning, where I'm not just speaking to some people that that coming from a certain perspective. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
For sure. That's good, man. I think that too, like the number one thing on my radar, and I know some of y'all have been sitting on the edge of y'all seats waiting for this to happen, so I'm gonna throw out here. The biggest thing for me is read your Bible. Understand what God says about loving people.
That's right.
And so it doesn't say love people based on their race, based on their culture, based on their preferences. It doesn't tell you to love people based on certain thing other than the fact that God said love people.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so like that's the first thing. So read your Bible, understand the character and the heart of God. How does God see us? And we ought to look at people and view people and pursue people through the lens of Christ. Right. So how did Christ pursue people? That's what we need to do. And so I think that's the fundamental thing, right?
Sure.
So like, and then we go outside and we read, we get these books and we, seek other people to actually build real life, real time relationships with people so that we can get experience with this. Because if it doesn't leave your head and reach your heart, then what's happening? You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so it has to reach your heart. It has to become a part of who you are. And so now, for instance, when George Floyd happened, right? I had said this quite a few times, and people were like, man, what can we do? How can we change this? I'm like, have conversations.
Yeah.
Build relationships. Because what'll happen is that because you get to know me and because we become brothers or brothers and sisters, now you're defending your family. You're not just defending me because I'm black, but you're defending me because I'm your brother.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
And vice versa.
That's right.
And so that's what we have to. That's what we have to get to that point, and understanding that as we diversify our communities, that the call is that much more important for us to break down those barriers of cultural, obstacles and all that stuff. Because, man, like God is calling us to be a diverse community. When we get to heaven, y'all, like it's not just gonna be black people, it's not just gonna be white people, it's not just gonna be Hispanic people, it's not gonna be, just one people group. It's gonna be God's people, like God's the believers, those who accepted Him, who lived out the things that He has called us to do here in this earth as His ambassadors. And so our aim has to be to do what God has instructed us to do as believers here in the earth. And so I think that's very important. Like that we just kind of, point out, because I know some of them are sitting on the edge of the seat and like, man, they got to say the Bible. They got to say the Bible. Yes, the Bible is the fundamental thing. And honestly, watch it. This is beautiful. God dog it. It's the fundamental thing, but it's also the pinnacle. It's the foundation, but it's also the tipping point, like the high point, the climax of how we love people. Like, we learn from here, and then we have our experiences in the middle, but that's always the standard as well as much as it is the foundation for how we love people. You know what I mean? And so the beautiful thing about the Bible is that we have it in its instructions, and it's there for us to read and to and for us to live by. So pick up your Bible.
That's right.
Pick up your Bible.
Amen. Amen and amen. Preach.
Just pick up your Bible. I don't know if acumen would fit right here, but acumen.
Yeah, theological acumen.
I'm so joking, right? But seriously, I think that's a great starting point. But then too, like, just understanding that, man, we are different. God built us different.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we have to apologize for that.
No.
We don't have to. We shouldn't have to work around that. Like, no, we should lean into who we are, but also be just as diligent in leaning into other cultures, understanding other people, for who they are, and being it so that we can serve them well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so even thinking about the platinum rule that you threw out there, right? Which is a beautiful thing. Getting to the place where we can love people how they want to be loved, right?
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing, because even the sentiment of loving your neighbor as yourself, you have to think, man, like me with all my preferences, all my biases, all of the things that I like, the things that I prefer, like, I would want somebody to know enough about me to understand how to not offend me.
That's right.
So that means I have to do the same homework with someone else and understand how to not offend them, but also how to engage them and to serve them. Because how you serve me may not be, or the best way to serve me may not be the best way to serve you.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
That's right.
Just because of the cultural norms and differences and all that stuff. Exactly. And so, like diversity is such a delicate thing, but it's such a necessary pursuit. Yeah. Such a necessary pursuit.
For sure.
So, man, this has been a great conversation, man.
Yeah. And I think it's so important. So this is one other thing I'd snap on to all that, and probably maybe ties back to the political piece in a little bit. And that is, I think that an important next step for churches, being that, here we are, 50 plus years later after MLK died, and still we're dealing with that Sunday morning is the most segregated day of the week.
Sad.
And so how does that change? That changes by us taking down the straw men that keep us from addressing the real issues. Yeah. So I had a member at our church. We had coffee a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago. Anyway, so he's talking about, he's watched this podcast where people are talking about, CRT and some of this stuff. And I'm not saying there aren't important things we need to address as churches and walk through some of those things. But I said, you know what? For many churches, it's a straw man. Yeah. Because if I'm teaching the Bible on Sunday morning, CRT ain't in there. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so unless I bring it to my people's awareness, they're not tracking with it on Sunday morning, right? Mm-hmm. So for a lot of churches, instead of asking whether I am pro or con, all these theological agendas of anti-racism and all these sort of things, what we need to do is ask ourselves, are we faithfully reaching all the people on our block that need to hear the good news of Jesus? Yeah. No matter what their background is. Yeah. Yeah. And are we beginning to staff and plan and pray about how God's going to help us reach those people on purpose? Yeah. That's a vision that right, draw people into a growing relationship with Jesus locally, regionally, and globally. Yes, that was Jesus' marching orders, right? Yeah. To make disciples of all nations. Here's the good news, church. That's your block. Your block is all nations. Hey. By 2050, the United States will be majority non-minority. That means people will be from all different nations together, probably in one family. Yeah. Bringing multiple different ethnic heritages to their family. Yeah, which is a beautiful thing. Just in our city, and we're not a huge city. 220,000 in the city, another 200 plus in the Mobile surrounding area. 75 different language groups just in our area. That's just our city. Your city may be more diverse than that. Your block may be just as diverse as that. Yeah. So the good news is the world has come to us. Yeah. So how are we gonna deal with it? How are we gonna be intentional about it? So I don't say that to be condemning. I say the opportunity's there, right? The opportunity is there if we begin to ask, how do we know our own culture?
Yeah.
How do we begin to know the cultures those we want to reach?
Yeah.
And love them, right?
Yeah.
Love them as we're going to recognize that they are different. But that's okay.
For sure.
Because God didn't call us to like everything that people do in other people groups. He called us to love them because he loves them, right?
Yeah.
And aren't we thankful,
Hey.
right? That Romans 5:8 says that he loved us while we were still sinners, right? So let me just give a nuance to that he loved us while there was difference, right? Perfect, holy God, sin's not even something that's appealing to him, right?
Yeah.
Yet he loves sinners. That's polar opposites, right? God loved us while we were unlovely and totally opposite than him.
Yeah.
And so gospel love says we love people while they're totally different than us.
Yeah.
Like God models that for us.
That's good.
So is it uncomfortable, challenging? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Is it worth it? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It's worth it.
That's good. That's so good. Well, hey, y'all. I think this is a good place to end. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, we could. I mean, as long as they finish their popcorn, right? You told them your
as long
popcorn
as you
earlier.
finish your popcorn.
Yeah.
You probably just got through popping. But we still popping. You know what I'm saying? Hey. Nah, hey,
exactly. Exactly.
Hey, listen, thank you so much for joining the conversation. We're going to continue having conversations just like this. If you are a church leader or if you are a member of a diverse church community, please make sure you hit that subscribe button.
Or you want to be, right?
Or you want to be. This is a resource. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel right now. Yeah, right now. Hit that notification bell. Get all the content. And I want you to meet us back here next week on Mega Podcast.
Mega Podcast. Next time on Mega Podcast.
I'll give you, for instance, so this is not a cultural thing as much as I think it's really across all cultures. Like something I often tell people as a pastor is when you're visiting people that have lost a loved one, don't feel like you have to say something.
That's good.
Like the ministry of presence for some people in trauma is what they need.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can
That's
say
good, Micah.
you can say a token phrase that you just threw a bomb in the room. And just because you felt the need to say something,
right,
it's better to say nothing than say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So I would say not only be aware of what you're saying and how they're tracking with you, but sometimes eating your words and not saying something you're going to regret goes a long way.
Come on.
Right? We learned that real quick in a marriage relationship, right?
Yes, sir.
I would rather swallow my words, collect my thoughts, and say something that is productive and helpful than throw out something just because I'm frustrated or feel like I need to say something when I end up saying the wrong thing, and it takes a lot more work to repair the damage I've done than it would have done processing and just waiting and saying less. That could actually be a good conversation.